It's no secret how much Generative Fill has changed Photoshop, but if you still feel like you aren't making the most of these AI features, then this video is for you. Here you'll learn all of the fundamentals of working with Generative Fill, from defining selections, writing prompts, and tons of other creative use cases that you can apply in your projects right now. Since there is so much that we're going to be covering here, I also created a handy AI reference guide that you can find in the description below after watching this video. It summarizes all of the key concepts that you'll learn here, but with that, let's kick things off with the fundamentals of working with Generative Fill. Now, to begin, you need to understand the different ways that you can access Generative Fill inside of Photoshop. And the most basic rule of thumb is that you need to define a selection for Generative Fill to be applied within. So you can use any of your selection tools for this, but one of the easiest tools for generating AI selection areas is the lasso tool. Accessing the lasso tool by pressing L, we can just click and drag around an area that we would like to create something within. In this case, I'll create this rectangle, and I want to add a window, for example. With this selection area defined, anything within this selection will be used to fill with an AI generation. To tell Photoshop what we want to create, inside of the contextual taskbar, while our selection is active, we can click on Generative Fill. But if you don't see this taskbar, all you need to do is go up to Window and down here to contextual taskbar to reveal it. And for context, I'm currently using Photoshop CC 2025. Anyways, once you have that taskbar visible, we can click on Generative Fill and type whatever prompt we would like to fill this selection. Since I want to add a window, I'll just type in window and click on generate. This will take a second to load, and throughout this video, I'll cut out the generation time so that we can just move on with the tutorial, but it will take up to 30 plus seconds depending on what you're trying to generate. Once a generation is complete, you're going to have 3 different variations that you can choose from by default. These are found in 2 different areas. We can either find them in the properties panel, which appears automatically, or we can click on the arrows in the contextual taskbar to filter between them. Now, if you don't like any of the results, you can create 3 more variations by clicking generate once again. You can do this inside of the contextual taskbar or inside of the properties panel. For example, I'll click the generate button in the properties panel, and it's going to create 3 new variations, but still on the same layer. Now, it's important to note that the layers that are created with AI have this little sparkle icon, or whatever you want to call it, and that just represents that this is an AI layer. And when we click on it, we're going to see the properties panel with all of the variations inside. After the 3 new variations that I just created, you'll notice that I now have 6 in total, and I can click between all of them and they all give me something a little bit different. Now, if you find a specific generation that you really like way more than the other ones, what you can tell Photoshop to do is generate more options similar to the one that you liked. So for example, let's say I really like this window, but I want a few more options. To generate similar options, we can click on the 3 dots and go to generate similar. This is now going to take that first generation and use it as a reference to create some other options of similar styles to find something that works better in our image. Going between these other options, we have totally different styles of windows, but they all have the same commonality of that white border around the window. We just have a bunch of different styles to choose from. So at the most basic level, that is generating new elements with Generative Fill. But if you want to remove something with Generative Fill, then we just have to do a similar process, except we don't want to fill in any prompt. For example, with my lasso tool still active, I'm going to create a selection around this car that I want to remove in the background. Now, when you want to remove something, you need to define an area just outside of the object that you want to remove. The reason that this is important is because you need to give Generative Fill a little bit of overlap to tell it what pixels need to be blended in based on the surrounding areas. So for example, I'll go and click and drag loosely around the car like so, giving plenty of room, including the shadow and the wall of this building. With that selection active, I'll go to Generative Fill, and since I want to remove something from the contents of this selection, I'm not going to add any prompt. That means that Generative Fill will look at the surrounding pixels and try to generate something that will match that inner area. I'll click on Generate. After some time loading, we have again 3 different variations that we can choose from to cover up that car and have a new result. The same things would apply as before. If we wanted to generate similar, we could click on the 3 dots, generate similar, or we could generate 3 new options by clicking on the generate button once again to define a new AI generation from the original selection. Now, when you're using these AI features, one really important thing to remember is that the quality is going to be less than your original photo in most cases. In this particular image, the photo isn't super high quality, so you can't really tell the difference between the AI generation and the original photo. However, when you have a high-res raw image, for example, and you're adding these AI elements, when you go and zoom into your photo, you're going to notice a disparity in the quality between the AI image and your original. Although there's not a perfect way to solve this right now, and I think it's just a matter of AI progressing and the generations getting better over time, some things that you can do right now are the following. Your first option is to upscale any of your generations. After creating a generation like we did in either of the two examples so far, you can go to the Properties panel and then just click on this button right here. This is going to upscale that generation and basically just add a little bit of sharpening to that AI area. Although this isn't foolproof and it's not going to make a huge difference, it is something to remember. The other option you have, however, is to work in smaller pieces. Because when you use generative fill in smaller pieces at a time, you're going to get a much higher quality result. So rather than trying to make a selection of your entire photo and generating your elements that way, what you can do instead is to just work in small pieces and break it down for a higher quality. So currently at the time of recording, those are your two best options, but I do believe in the future this will get solved as the AI models improve. Now, in these two examples that we just covered, you saw how we can generate new elements in a photo or remove elements from an image. But we can also generate images from scratch now with generative fill inside of Photoshop, and that can be done by clicking on this button down here at the bottom of the toolbar. Clicking here will open up the Generate Image panel where we can add a longer prompt that will be used to generate an entire image that fills our canvas. Now we have a few other options that we can choose from, such as the style of our photo. If we have a reference image that we want our photo to look like, we can upload that here. And then we can choose a lot of different effects and things for our photo by choosing between all of the different effects that we would like to include for the stylization of our image. So basically, it's going to take your prompt as well as all of the effects that you've chosen and use those together to create your image. Now, as you'll see, when you first open the window, we have a bunch of different options that we can click on to basically take those exact settings that was used to generate these different images. But the problem is, if you want to create something totally unique to you or you have an idea in your head, you need to learn how to create better prompts. And that is something that a lot of people struggle with. So let me break down a simple formula that you can use to generate your own images perfectly as you imagine them in Photoshop. Now, when you're generating an image, although we can use reference photos, a lot of people struggle with describing exactly what they want to see. So to get really good results with generative fill and image generation, you need to learn how to craft an effective prompt. A great prompt is going to include the following ingredients. What is in your photo? What style is it in? How does the lighting look? What environment does it take place in? And what technical details are involved if the image were real? To make this more concrete, here are some specific examples of that same formula. First, for describing the what part of the equation, instead of just saying tree, you could be more specific and write something like mature oak tree with thick branches. Next, to define the style, you need to explain if you're looking to create something like a photo, digital art, an illustration, or something like that. For my example, I'll write professional nature photography in my prompt to describe exactly how I want my composition to look. Next, you need to describe the lighting. For my example, I'll add backlit with warm golden hour sunlight casting long shadows to the prompt. Fourth, to add context, we need to help the AI understand the setting, such as in a lush forest environment with dappled light filtering through the leaves. Finally, we need to add any technical details about our image, so I'll add sharp focus with highly detailed bark texture to finish off my prompt. Now, to show you the major difference when getting specific with your prompts, I first generated this image with the prompt tree in the forest. Some of these results are pretty cool, but each is wildly different and I have no control over the specifics of each outcome. Now for my second, more specific prompt that we just created together, I wrote mature oak tree, professional nature photography, backlit with warm golden hour sunlight in a lush forest environment, sharp focus with detailed bark texture. This time each variation is much more similar and the results are more tightly aligned to the specifics of what I was looking for. Now if you feel like you're going to forget any of these prompts prompting tips and this formula that I just mentioned, again, I created a free PDF cheat sheet in the description below that breaks down the exact formula for you to remember, plus all of the additional AI tips that we're about to cover next. But anyways, now that you understand prompting, which is probably the most confusing part of working with AI, let's now go through some fun use cases for both regular photos and creative editing. So one of the first ways that we can use generative fill is when we have a photo that doesn't quite fit the dimensions that we're looking for. To give you an example, let's say we have this photo of ourselves, we love how we look in it looks awesome, but we want to go and post it on Instagram in a vertical format so we maybe get a few more likes or something, but we have a horizontal image. So rather than having to crop your photo a ton, we can still have a nice composition and just extend our image using generative fill. So in this case, I have a horizontal image that is on a 4000 by 5000 pixel document, so it will perfectly fit the Instagram crop. But to fill in the excess area, we just need to create a selection, again, to define what we want generative fill to fill in, and then we'll just let Photoshop do the rest of the work. So to quickly select these broad areas, I'll grab the marquee tool, in particular the rectangular marquee tool. Make sure that we have the new selection mode enabled and a 0 pixel feather. Now I can just click and drag out like so with a little bit of overlap of the original image. And then I want to add a secondary selection. So I'll hold the shift key to add to my selection and do the same thing down here. Again, selecting where we want to use generative fill and overlapping with the image that we want to extend from. With that good to go, I'll click on Generative Fill, and then I'll leave this empty because I want Photoshop to just extend from the overlapping pixels. I'll click on Generate, and then once those generations are complete, we can go through our variations and find the one that we like. I think this one looks pretty good there. And now we have a ready to go image that we can share online in the perfect format that we're looking for. And it didn't matter that we got the wrong orientation in camera. Another use case for generative fill actually comes within the crop tool and a feature known as generative expand. In situations like this, where we have a crooked horizon line and maybe we want to straighten it so it looks a little bit better when we hang it on our wall or something. The unfortunate part of this is when you go and straighten a photo so much, you dramatically crop it. So if you didn't want to crop your image quite as much, we could use the generative expand feature to solve this problem. Activating the crop tool by pressing C, I'll just make sure that my crop preset is set to original ratio, so it's going to maintain the same ratio of the original image. I'll then make sure that delete crop pixels is disabled, and for the fill, I want this to be generative expand. Hovering just outside of the corner of the cropping bounding box, I'll click and drag over to rotate this image until the horizon in the back is straight. The problem, however, is we have all of these transparent areas, but generative fill will get to work to solve all of that for us. It's going to look at the missing pieces based on the edge pixels of the photo, and it's going to fill that in. So pressing the check mark to confirm those changes while that fill is set to generative expand, I'll click on the check mark. After everything has finished loading, we still have our 3 variations as we're used to, but this time it was applied to the crop adjustment and it fills in the outer edge of our photo. So I'm pretty happy with how this one looks. The arm looks realistic, his shirt's extended nicely, and all of the background looks really good. So now we would have a photo that we could hang on our wall and it's not going to look crooked all the time because of the crazy horizon line, for example. So as a photographer, I get a lot of use out of this tool, and if you ever have a crooked photo, definitely make sure to take advantage of generative expand. Now, earlier in this video, you saw how we could use generative fill to remove simple objects from the background of a photo, but I want to take this one step further and show you how to remove more complex distractions in this image, such as these crowds in the background of the plaza. Now, just like before, we need to define our selection area, and knowing a few things about selection tools in Photoshop is definitely going to be useful, but I'm going to walk you through some helpful techniques that you can use when you need to remove larger areas such as this. So to begin, I want to select the background of the photo, but I don't want to select the 2 main subjects here. So to do that, I'll click on my image layer and then click on Select Subject from the contextual taskbar. Now to select the background, we can invert our selection by clicking on this button right here in the contextual taskbar. So now we're selecting everything outside of our subjects. Now to only define the specific areas that we want to remove, so we want to define the areas of the crowd here, I can use the lasso tool by pressing L. I'll set the feather to 0 pixels, and I want to choose the intersect with selection option. That means that wherever I click and drag, it's going to take the current selection and then merge it with the new selection that I'm about to define. So clicking and dragging around the crowd, giving some room around all of the edges. We don't need to be careful about the people because of our intersect with selection mode. So I'll go around here and then back like so to define the exact area that I want to remove. Letting go, we now mix the selection of our background and the lasso selection. With that good to go, we can click on Generative Fill, and then I want to just remove everything, so I'm going to leave this empty and click on Generate. Our first generation doesn't look very good, so I'll click on Generate again, and I'll repeat this process until I find something that works for this photo. After creating a bunch of generations, I'll go with this one for this example. There are some other problems, but we can touch that up in just a moment. I'll go ahead and add another selection of these people up here to remove them, and once again, click on Generative Fill to remove them. Once that is finished loading and you're happy with the variation, the final thing to do is touch up any weird areas of your photo. In this example, that's a bit of the staircase here, so I'll just go and create a selection around the staircase that seems a little bit weird. Do something like this, and create a new generation with no prompt. And that will hopefully try to rebuild the stairs or just remove them altogether. After creating a few generations, I think that one looks good enough for me. We could upscale the resolution of that if we would like. And then for any other areas such as here, we can repeat this process one more time to finish up the result. After all of your generations are finished with different lasso adjustments, looking at the before and after, we have totally removed the crowd. There are some areas that we could maybe touch up, but considering how little work that was, this is a really amazing tool to remove larger areas within a photo. Now for the last few examples, you saw some more simple use cases for generative fill in terms of just improving regular images. But if you want to use generative fill to get more creative with your editing, then the next few examples are going to help you with that. So in this photo here, let's say that I want to create a canal type thing within the roadway of this photo. I want there to be reflections of all of these surrounding buildings and things like that. Now, if you've tried to create a reflection by yourself in Photoshop, you know that it's pretty time consuming and often you don't even get the result that you're looking for. But with generative fill, it's so much easier and you actually get a super good result. So for this example, I've already gone ahead and selected the roadway. So I'm going to go and load that selection now. With that selection active, I just need to tell Photoshop what I want to fill within that area. So I'll click on Generative Fill and I'll type in reflection and click Generate. With the help of that prompt, Photoshop will look at the surrounding pixels in the image and try to create a natural reflection based on the other details of the photo. Looking at our first variation, that already looks pretty good, but I'll look through the other options to see what we have. Let's see how the background looks here. I like the final wall of the canal there. So I think that this generation is the best one for me. I might enhance the detail by clicking the Enhance Detail icon, and now that looks pretty good to me. It has the water ripples, it has the matching signs that we're looking for, the doors match pretty good across the entire photo, and considering that was done in less than 30 seconds, I can't imagine a better way of creating a reflection in this photo. So that is the first and probably one of my favorite ways of using generative fill for creative editing, which is reflections. Now in this next example, we can use generative fill to create new clothing on our subjects. And although it does have hit and miss results, it is kind of fun to play around with. In this example, I'm going to change this gentleman's t-shirt. So I'll grab the lasso tool by pressing L. I'll choose the new selection mode, and then I'll just create a lasso selection with room to spare around the outside of his entire t-shirt. Once that selection is active, just as you might expect at this point in the video, we'll click on Generative Fill and type in what we want to see inside of this prompt. Now, unlike a full image prompt where we need to be very specific, you can just type in specifically what you want. For this example, I'll type in red plaid t-shirt with brown suspenders for my prompt, and I'll click on Generate. Our first variation looks pretty good at first glance. There are some weird things with the t-shirt, but we can look between some other options here, and those are looking pretty good. This one in particular looks pretty convincing to me. I guess when you zoom in, some of the details fall apart, but if you just wanted a photo for social media or something to create a meme out of or whatever, this would be a super passable result. Again, we could just create some more options if we would like by clicking Generate. So we'll see what else we can create. Looking at these other options, I still think that this one was probably the best, and if there are any weird areas that you don't like, we could select them with the lasso tool and then leave our prompt empty, click on generate, and it would try to fix up those little areas. So that's a worthwhile trick to remember if there are little pieces of a generation that you're not happy with. But anyways, looking at that before and after, we have totally changed the outfit of this gentleman, and hopefully he likes his new fashion style. Now, another creative option for generative fill in Photoshop is to give yourself a new haircut. If you've ever felt like you maybe would look good with a certain style of hair, you can try it out with generative fill. In this example, I'm going to give this guy some longer hair on top, so I'll grab the lasso tool just like we have done before, and I'll create a selection around where I would like the hair to appear. So I'll go somewhere down here, along his hairline, down this way, and up like that. Now it's going to be best if you can shape your selection so it kind of matches the object that you're trying to create. Although mine kind of looks like a jellyfish, we'll see how this turns out. And typing in my prompt, long swept back hair with short sides, I'll click on generate and we'll see what we get. That first result looks pretty good and convincing. If you've ever seen The Incredibles, he kind of has the baby's haircut, I guess, but that looks pretty good considering it's a new hair transplant, and you could take this hairstyle in whatever other direction you want. But considering that was just one generation, I think that looks pretty convincing. So I know that we covered a lot of different things about generative fill in this video, and with so many new AI features coming out inside of Photoshop Beta, there's so much that you can try with AI, and it's becoming a more and more powerful tool for your editing. Now, if you haven't already, remember to download the free PDF cheat sheet for this lesson down in the description below. It's totally free and it covers all of the major concepts that we talked about throughout this lesson. But since you've made it this far in the video, I would love to hear about the ways that you're using AI in Photoshop down in the comments below. But anyways, that is all for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.